All right, so we're kind of continuing on with grouping symbols. In the last video, we talked about factoring out when you had two variables that were the same, like if I have 5x plus, I don't know, m x, and I need to pull out something, I need to factor out to get something out of there, I had to pull out the two x's, I could remove them by factoring. That was the first thing we did. But now we're going to talk about those other trick things, or those things that kind of get people stuck. So, this seems like a very simple problem. You're like, oh my gosh, Mr. Craig, this seems very simple. There's just, d equals m over v. That should be easy. But it says, where is the variable we are solving for? Is this an issue? And you say, what are you talking about? Well, it says that we're solving for v. So these are all variables, but because we're solving for v, I'm going to circle v. That makes it my variable. Then we treat everything else like they're regular numbers. And so if you look here, we have m touching the v. There's a line there, but really it's a fraction. So we say, okay, m is the coefficient, and that means that this is one side of the equation and others. And so you say, oh, well, if m's at the top, how do we get rid of it? Do we divide by m? Okay, well, we divide by, let's see, we divide by m, divide by m, divide by m, and m over m cancels out. You're like, oh, it's d over m. That was really easy, Mr. Craig. The problem is, where is v located? V is located in the denominator. So if I was actually to separate this, yeah, I would have m, but I would have 1 over v because v is in the denominator. If I remove the m, I have to keep a placeholder there. So by taking that out, I get equals 1 over v. And that actually isn't easy. So what we're trying to talk about here, and what makes this so confusing, is when the variable that we are solving for is in the denominator of an equation. And so what I want you to do really quick is I want you to go ahead and write this down here. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've already paused and wrote this down. If the variable is in the denominator, get the variable out of the denominator before attempting to solve. Meaning, what makes this problem hard is that, or difficult or scary, is that the v, or my variable, is in the denominator. So I see my v is in the denominator. How do I get the v out of the denominator? Well, how do I get rid of divide by v? The opposite of divide by v is times by v. So if I multiply this side by v, remember, sides is because of my lollipop. Boom, boom, boom. You've got to divide your equation into two sides so you can keep your equation balanced. So if I'm going to multiply this side by v, I have to multiply this side by v. And so v over v cancels out to 1, and I get left with m. And because m is in the numerator, when I get rid of the denominator, it just leaves m. And then I have v times d. So if I want to do it alphabetically, it would be dv, right? So, or vd or dv, it doesn't matter. Now, I'm trying to still, what am I solving for? I'm solving for v. So I circle my variable, and now my coefficient is d, and it's right next to it. It's pretty easy to get rid of that. How do I get rid of times d? Well, I'm going to divide by d. Divide this side by d, then I have to divide that side by d. And so what I end up with is v equals m divided by d. And so what looked like an easy problem got difficult because you had that variable in the denominator. So really, you kind of have to look at the problem, and you circle the variable, and if everything looks okay, you keep solving, or you have to, if you have two of the same variable, maybe you have to factor it out. But if you see your variable in the denominator, before you go any further, you have to get the variable out. So let's try another one of those really quick here. Go ahead and try that one really quick. Pause the video. Attempt it, because if you just wait for me to do it, you don't know if you know. You don't even know what you don't know. So hopefully you try it, or you tried the activities below in the problems list underneath here. But here we go. So I have this equation, m plus 2n over h equals 5. But it says I'm solving for h. So h is my variable. So I solve for h, I circle h, and as soon as I circle h, I realize h is in the denominator. And we said it cannot be in the denominator. So how do I get rid of divide by h? Well, the opposite of divide by h is times by h. So I divide my equation into two sides. Boom, boom, boom. So how do I get rid of divide? I multiply. If I multiply this side by h, then I have to multiply the other side by h. And h over h is 1, and that leaves me m plus 2n. And what's 5 times h? 5h. And you're like, oh, okay, that was kind of interesting. No longer, I circle my variable again, and this time I notice that my h is not in the denominator, so I can just say, okay, what's touching it? Oh, what's touching it? The 5 is touching it. Okay, how do I get rid of the coefficient? It's times, so I have to divide. So if I divide this side by 5, I have to divide the other side by 5. Divide both sides by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. They cancel out to 1. They don't cancel. They reduce to 1. And that leaves me h. I don't need to put the 1 in front of it. And then I don't know what m divided by 5 is, or m 2n divided by 5 is. So I'm just going to leave that m plus 2n over 5 equals h. That's it. That's all I can do. That's my answer. Well, what looked difficult, pull it out from underneath, and then it became pretty simple to do. So I'm going to try just one more to make sure we get this, because people say, well, Mr. Craig, Mr. Nelson, Mrs. Garcia, you guys do the easy problems on the videos, and then we try to do the problems, and the problems are so hard. So we wanted to make sure we gave you one that was so hard. So, again, we have this equation, and we're solving for m. Okay, I'm solving for m, so I'm looking for m in the equation. And I look for m. There's a w. That's not an m. That's an upside down m. Here's m. Oh, look, it's in the denominator. As soon as I see m in the denominator, I know I got to get it out of there. Now, this is where this is a slightly trickier problem. So I could just get rid of the m, but we talked about in multi-step equations where if the problem looks ugly or difficult and it's something hard, make it easy. And I think if I got rid of the m, I'd still have the 2 in the denominator, and that would still look ugly. So instead of just getting rid of the denominator by multiplying by m, I'm going to multiply by 2m, because that's going to get everything that's in the denominator of the fraction out. But if I do it to one side of the equation, I do it to the other, because the multiplication property of equality says what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So 2m over 2m, that cancels, not cancels, it reduces to 1, right? Simplifies to 1. I don't need to write 1. I bring down the w minus 3. And now on this side, what is 8 times 2m? Well, 8 times 2 is 16, and then we bring the m over. And now, we went from this really weird problem to a kind of simple, straightforward problem. I go, okay, I'm still solving for m. That hasn't changed, so I circle my variable. Now I know what my coefficient is. If anything touching it, that's, oops, don't double underline, that's a constant if you don't double underline. I underline my coefficient, that's 16. And now I say, well, how do I get rid of a coefficient? Well, the opposite of multiply is divide. So I'm going to divide both sides of this equation by 16. Division property of equality says what you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other to keep it balanced. 16 divided by 16 is 1. I don't need to have the 1, so it simplifies to 1, but I don't need the 1. And I go, okay, what's w minus 3 divided by 16? I haven't a clue because I don't know what w is. So I can just write w minus 3 over 16. And now I know what that is. Now, if you wanted to, you could flip it around because m is on the right, and a lot of times we want to do the symmetric property and say, well, m equals w minus 3 over 16. This is technically correct, but because a lot of times with computer software, it's hard to write that up, most of the time I'm going to keep that variable on the left. Doesn't mean that you didn't get the right answer here. All right, hopefully you can do that. If you have any questions, please email us. Thank you.